hidden love, embracing all in oneness, may each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other. Hidden love, embracing all. So, good evening once again to everybody. We were studying this Mahatma letters to AP Senate, and we are doing chronological letter number 15, which was sent by Mahatma KH to Senate in February 1881. And we have already covered in the last session some occult topics which are mentioned in the letter, like the magnetism of the person being an indicator of his spiritual advancement. Also, the letter touched upon the occult machinery of the cosmos. And he mentioned that past, present, and future, they are the objective phases of the subjective whole. Then he also mentioned about relation of the material cosmos to the immaterial cosmos, which we saw in detail. Then Mahatmaji spoke about the occult properties of sound, which allow it to be transmitted without the need for an intervening medium. Now, the next part of the letter, it talks about the existence of 7 subjective colors. And these are complementary to the visible colors to the colors which are visible in the spectrum. Then these are the elementals or the semi-intelligent forces who communicate with us through colors and sound. So today we will be covering this part, and we have seen how AP Senate, he and Mahatmaji, they both wanted to meet each other, but that was not possible, neither in their physical body nor in their astral body. And the third option was for Senate to hear Mahatmaji's voice through the occult properties of sound in Akash. But the Western mind, due to the impediments of the materialistic Western society, they have no conception of this occult property of sound or any of the occult machinery of the cosmos. So we will continue from there on, and I will share the slides with you. So we had covered up to slide 11. Transmission of sound, this we had completed. So we will consider the next slide, that is the slide number 12. To some little extent, that faculty, which faculty? Mahatmaji is talking about the faculty of understanding the ideal machinery of the occult cosmos and the laws that govern it. So he spoke about that in connection with the occult properties of sound. And then he mentions that to some little extent, that faculty can be acquired by the Europeans through study and meditation. But that's all. And here is the bar which has hitherto prevented a conviction of the Theosophical truths from gaining wider currency among Western nations, caused Theosophical study to be cast aside as useless and fantastic by Western philosophers. So in the East, see, this Brahma Vidya, those concepts are still preserved in the religious scriptures, like in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, in the Puran, and there are various schools of philosophy. So in all of them, these concepts of Brahma Vidya are preserved. The vocabulary of the language that is used, in our case, it is Sanskrit. So that language is adequate to express these concepts. And the people are able to understand the Theosophical truths more readily because they already have an idea of this Brahma Vidya. But in the Western countries, that is not the case. It is said that even the international headquarters of Theosophical Society, they were established in Adyar due to the presence of T. Subbarao. He was a great scholar of Advait Vedant. And in fact, HPB wanted him to review the secret doctrine because those concepts were so similar. So many of them have been taken from the Upanishads. Damodar Mahavankar, in fact, he says that there is no difference between Arhatic Yoga of Buddhism and Advait Vedanta. But as we have seen that in the West, the language, culture, the society, the religion, all of them, they have evolved in such a way that they prevent any understanding of these theosophical truths. And in fact, they make it seem absurd or even useless. And for this reason, Mahatma Ji says, how shall I teach you to read and write or even comprehend a language of which no alphabet palpable or words audible to you have been invented? So this was the situation at that time when the communication in 1881, when this communication was happening. But the Western nations have come a long way in all these many years. And now they are very enthusiastic about yoga and all these Eastern concepts. The next point mentions, would not the very technical terms be to him an unintelligible jargon, an abracadabra of meaningless sounds, and the very instruments and apparatuses used, but miraculous monstrosities? So one should realize that the study of occult cosmos, it is not merely philosophy, but it is a very scientific study with very precise technical terms. And man himself is the laboratory of this occult cosmos. And his own constitution is the apparatus. Then the next slide here, it mentions, and suppose for one instant, I were to describe to you the hues of those color rays that lie beyond the so-called visible spectrum, rays invisible to all, but a very few even among us, to explain how we can fix in space any one of the so-called subjective or accidental colors, the complement, to speak mathematically, moreover, of any other given color of a dichromatic body, which alone sounds like an absurdity. Could you comprehend, do you think, their optical effect or even my meaning? So here Mahatma KH gives another example of the occult cosmos. In the earlier part of the letter we saw he spoke about sound, and now he speaks about subjective colors. Dichromatic here means an object or a body which is perceivable by two separate sets of colors. The first set of colors, we know it is our ordinary visible spectrum, VIBGYOR. These are, we can call them, they are objective colors. The second set of colors, they are called as subjective colors, and they are complementary to these objective colors. In fact, subjective, see what subjective means, it is something internal to us, right? So it is psychological, it is our thoughts or our feelings. So subjective colors should mean that the colors which are perceived on the planes of subjectivity, that means on the astral or mental plane. Now, color is nothing but it's a frequency of light, which is an electromagnetic radiation, just an energy. And all energies or forces like light, sound, magnetism, which we see manifested on the physical plane, they have their causes in the inner or the higher spiritual planes. This HPB has explained in great detail in Secret Doctrine. She mentions that there is no blind force. At their head, always there is a real and conscious and an intelligent cause. And these intelligent beings, they are the lofty Dhyani Chauhans, the Dhyan Chauhans. These forces or energies are nothing but the emanations of their spiritual qualities. This is a very important statement, that the forces and energies are the emanations of the spiritual qualities of the Dhyan Chauhans. So these energies, they radiate from those higher, from those lofty planes, they radiate down plane by plane up to the physical plane. And on the subtler planes, they manifest. They will manifest on every plane, that energy which is being radiated. And what is the energy? It is the emanation of the spiritual qualities of the Dhyan Chauhans. It will, as it is radiating to the denser planes, the lower planes, it will manifest on all the planes. And on these subtler planes, it manifests as semi-intelligent forces, which are called as elementals or the forces of nature. And this correlation of the elementals with pure matter is what manifests on our physical plane as the terrestrial phenomena. So when the elementals interact with pure matter, they will manifest the force like light, heat, magnetism, cohesion. So just to make it clear, Dhyan Chauhans, they are on the spiritual plane and they are the source or the primary cause of the elementals. Elementals are on the mental and astral planes. And these elementals or nature spirits, they become the secondary cause, whose effect manifests on physical plane. And on the physical plane, the effects are electricity, light, magnetism, any other force which we see here. So light on the physical plane, we can see it by these objective colors, the visible spectrum. Every objective color has its elemental in the astral plane, which is the subjective color. So basically, these are the subjective colors on the astral plane. And a dichromatic body, it can be perceived not only by its objective color, that means the visible spectrum, but also by the subjective color, which is the elemental. To perceive any body by its subjective color, it requires extraordinary faculty. We require astral vision. Ordinarily, we are confined to seeing only by the visible spectrum of light. We don't see, nor do we have any names for those subjective colors. So further, Mahatma Ji tells Sinet, and since you see them not, such rays, nor can you know them, nor have you any names for them as yet in science. If I were to tell you, my good friend Sinet, if you please, without moving from your writing desk, try, search for and produce before your eyes the whole solar spectrum decomposed into 14 prismatic colors, 7 being complementary, as it is, but with the help of that occult light that you can see me from a distance as I see you. So this statement, it throws a lot of light on how Mahatmas can see anybody at a distance, especially when they take up an aspirant as a probationer, or when they accept a chela, then they are able to see the chela with the help of this astral light. The 7 colors of visible spectrum plus the 7 complementary colors or the subjective colors, they make up the total 14 colors. And occult light is nothing but this subjective color or the elemental by which one can see at a distance. So here in the next slide, I have just shown what is this electromagnetic spectrum that we know it on the physical plane. So it is nothing but the light frequencies. If you see at the rightmost side, the frequencies, they are indicated by this blue arrow and they are increasing. So the visible spectrum, it is a very narrow band of white. Before that, the radio waves, the microwave and the infrared waves are there. Then we have the 7 colors of the spectrum, the Vibgyor colors, beyond which we have the ultraviolet, the X-ray and the gamma rays. So as the frequency increases, these rays become very energetic, and then at a certain point, they will cross over into the next plane, that is the astral plane, which will have extremely high frequency, which is not discernible on our physical plane. Next, Mahatma Ji mentions in the letter, would you not be likely enough to retort by telling me in your own quiet, polite way that as there never were but 7, now 3 primary colors. Primary colors are red, green, blue, which moreover have never yet by any known physical process been seen decomposed further than the 7 prismatic hues. My invitation was as unscientific as it was absurd. Adding that my offer to search for an imaginary solar complement being no complement to your knowledge of physical science, I had better perhaps go and search for my mythical dichromatic and solar pairs in Tibet. For modern science has hitherto been unable to bring under any theory even so simple a phenomena as the colors of all such dichromatic bodies. And yet, truth knows these colors are objective enough. Objective enough here means he is saying that those colors on the astral plane, they can be visible if we train ourselves to do so. So modern science has not discovered these dichromatic bodies or the complementary colors. Although infrared imaging has been invented way back in 1929, but it is not the same as seeing these astral colors or the subjective colors. Uh, so here Mahatmaji has used humor. He says that since science knows nothing about it and Sinet also has no idea about it, so the Western people, they might just say that such fantastic colors, they might exist only in Tibet, but not here. Did I leave one point in that? The last one, yeah, the last point. So you see the insurmountable difficulties in the way of attaining not only absolute, but even primary knowledge in occult science for one situated as you are. These colors, sounds, they form the basic knowledge, the primary knowledge. If we want to attain the higher knowledge, we must know these simple basic facts. But if we cannot conceive them also, then how can we hope to understand the higher spiritual truths? This is what Mahatmaji is telling Sinet. Then moving to the next slide now. How could you make yourself understood? Command, in fact, those semi-intelligent forces whose means of communication with us are not through spoken words, but through sounds and colors, in correlation between the vibration of the two. So this is exactly what we discussed in the previous slides, that those subjective colors are basically the semi-intelligent forces which are called elementals. And we should remember the relation that at the head of every force is a conscious, intelligent, lofty being, the Dhyan Chauhan. Emanation of his spiritual qualities are the forces. As they radiate through every plane, they manifest on the inner planes as elementals. And those elementals are the subjective colors. And then on the physical plane, they manifest as the physical force or energies which we see. So if we cannot understand the subjective colors, then how can we even hope to command those semi-intelligent forces? These elements or the semi-intelligent forces, they are the various grades of elementals on astral and mental plane. And they form part of the hierarchies. These are intelligent hierarchies, and the universe is nothing. It is but a hierarchy, a hosts of hierarchies of these intelligent, semi-intelligent beings. And these elements are directed in their work by the Dhyan Chauhans. So one more thing which we should recall is that on the mental plane, our thoughts are expressed as colored musical pictures. The mind speaks by color, sound, and form. This was called the language of the gods. And there are some ancient books which have been written by initiates in this language. And some of the chelas, they also know this language. This was mentioned by Annie Besant in her book, Seven Bodies of Man. So this language of sound, light, and form that has been used for communication. If our thought is strong enough, then it takes up a definite form which is made up of that mental elemental essence, and it becomes an elemental. This elemental is expressed as color, sound, and form. Likewise, there are astral elementals too. Since these are formed on the subjective planes, the sound and color of which they are made and they communicate in, they are also subjective. And there always exists a correlation between sound and color. What this means is that every frequency of light or every frequency of color, it corresponds to some frequency of sound, and vice versa, whether they are subjective or objective. Subjective means on the inner planes, that is astral or mental. Objective means on our physical plane. In fact, many of you, or at least some of you, might have heard of cases where people have this ability of cross sensing. Cross sensing, it is rare, but it happens that a person can see the sound and he can hear the colors. To communicate with and command the elementals, a proper understanding of subjective colors is required. Among other things, there are many other things, but this is one of the requirements. And it is mentioned, it is said that HPP produced much of her phenomena because she knew how to command the elementals. Next point, for sound, light, and colors are the main factors in forming these grades of intelligences. These beings of whose very existence you have no conception, nor are you allowed to believe in them. See this last statement, nor are you allowed to believe in them. This is how spiritual progress gets hindered if something or somebody else controls your belief. So Sinnett had no idea about elementals, their characteristics or their uses. And in that Western society, even if anyone tried to believe, the others would not allow him to do so. How so? Those people, whether they were atheists or whether they were religious persons or whether they were materialists or even spiritualists. Spiritualist meaning who believed in communicating with the dead. So all those type of people and even the contemporary science at that time, they did not allow such beliefs to believe in elementals. So we can actually see that what a strong bearing religion, society, culture, science all have in molding the belief or the life of a person. Generally, what happens if the whole world is saying something, then any isolated person will also tend to go along with it. He will also start saying the same thing. But actually, what is required in these situations? If we are convinced about the truth of something, like when we study Theosophy and we come to know the higher truths, when we are convinced about those truths, then we must take a stand, even if it is contrary to the whole world. And this requires courage. But it is the only way which we can make ourselves useful in the Master's work. The last point says, because of all this, our very existence is denied. Yes, for this reason, are believers in us pronounced impostors and fools, and the very science which leads to the highest goal of the highest knowledge, to the real tasting of the tree of life and wisdom, is scouted as a wild flight of imagination. So these were the insurmountable problems which caused the Western minds to doubt the existence of the Mahatmas. Anyone believing in them was judged as a fraud or a fool. HPP was often at the receiving end of such backlash. This is really such a pity. They were intellectual minds, but they could not fathom the occult knowledge. And their stubbornness to stick to those prevalent beliefs, to those misconceptions, it is what deprived them of the real knowledge about the universe. In fact, about themselves, about life itself. They didn't have an open mind. And that is the very first step for climbing to this temple of divine wisdom. We say that a clean life, an open mind, an eager intellect. So the occult truths were not fathomable to those Western minds. Next, I warn you and will say no more, apart from reminding you in a general way that the tasks you are so bravely undertaking, that missio in partis infidelium, is the most ungrateful, perhaps of all tasks. Now, A.P. Sinnett, he fully believed in the Mahatmas. He was eager to receive knowledge from them. And he, at that time, was the vice president of the Theosophical Society. He was trying to reformat or reform the rules. He was trying to work on making the Theosophical Society more acceptable, its teachings more acceptable. And this is when Mahatmaji reminds him that his work was like a mission in the land of unbelievers. This is a Latin phrase, missio in partis infidelium. And this was because many other members of Theosophical Society, especially in the London Lodge, they did not share the same belief. And they would never be thankful to Sinet or the Theosophical Society. So Mahatma Ji is warning Sinet about it, not to discourage him, but in fact to forewarn him, so that he may know what he can expect and he must continue in face of all opposition. Then he says, but if you believe in my friendship for you, if you value the word of honor of one who never during his whole life polluted his lips with an untruth, then do not forget the words I once wrote to you. See my last letter, of those who engage themselves in the occult sciences. He who does it must either reach the goal or perish. Once fairly started on the way to the great knowledge, to doubt is to risk insanity. To come to a dead stop is to fall. To recede is to tumble backwards, headlong into an abyss. This statement actually, that one must either reach the goal and perish, this statement is quoted from the book of Ancient Scottish Rites. And it has a lot of truth, that if you start on this path, then you have to reach the end. You have to reach your goal. And this is a very important fact which Mahatma KH is stating here. All those who embark on the path of learning the occult sciences, so it is for all of them. One who takes up the study of occult science must master them completely. What happens when we take up the study of occult science? It is the law that the opposing forces will come into play. And these opposing forces cause doubts. They cause the person to recede or even to perish. So this is what spells his doom. In occult sciences, there are numerous branches of knowledge, and they are about the universe and its laws. In fact, the Purans, they speak of 7 branches of knowledge, and 4 of them HPB has mentioned in Secret Doctrine. She mentioned the 4 branches of knowledge, that is Yagya Vidya, Mahavidya, Guhya Vidya, and Atma Vidya. And she said that Atma Vidya is the only knowledge which is worth trying to reach or trying to study by the members of the Theosophical Society. Atma Vidya is to know who you really are, to recognize your true nature. So by knowing the self, everything else becomes known. And this is the reason that practical instructions in occult science, they are not provided in the Theosophical literature. Theosophy endorses Atma Vidya through Raj Yoga. Because studying occult science, what are the dangers that has been highlighted here? Then fear not if you are sincere, and that you are now. Are you as sure of yourself as to the future? So AP Sinet was sincere about learning the occult sciences, but would it be the same in future also? Because once started, there could be no stopping for the reasons we just saw. Study of occult science is not to be trifled with. This is a serious question to ask ourselves also. Something may be of interest to us. Out of curiosity, we may take up that task or study. But is it just a passing fancy, or are we going to pursue the goal till the goal is achieved? If we want to be useful co-workers in the master's task, then we have to commit ourselves, not only for present, but for future also. So we must be sure of ourselves. Further in the letter, your experience, your training, your intellect, your knowledge of the exterior world, in short, all combine to aid you in the accomplishment of the task you have undertaken. For they place you on an infinitely higher level than myself as regards the consideration of writing a book. After your society's own heart, I confess that I do take an interest in this book and its success, as great as in the success in life of its future author. Life of its future author. So Mahatma Ji knew that this book Sinet would be writing, The Occult World, and it would be based on his interactions with the Mahatma, on the teachings that he received from the Mahatma through these letters. And this book was later published. He wrote it and it was published in the same year, in 1881. Mahatma KH was keen about the success of this book as it would bring the truths of occult knowledge to the people. And he was equally keen for Sinnett to succeed in his quest on the path of knowledge. We, or most of us, are far from being the heartless, morally dried up mummies some would fancy us to be. Few of us would care to play the part in life of a desiccated pansy between the leaves of a volume of solemn poetry. None of our degree are like the stern hero of Bulwer's romance. Bulwer. This person, Edward Bulwer Lytton, he was an English aristocrat. He was a politician and he was also a writer. He was, in fact, also a member of the Rosicrucian Society in England. His son actually was the Viceroy of India, Lord Lytton. So Edward Bulwer Lytton, he used to write novels. He was a very famous writer. Sorry. He had written this occult novel, Zanoni, in 1842. In this novel, there is the character Zanoni, who is a Rosicrucian initiate, and he has the gift of immortality. But if he falls in love, he loses his gift. So he is warned about this by his master, who's a senior initiate, Mejnour. And perhaps this Mejnour, he's very stern, he's morally upright, and he follows all the rules of the initiates. It is almost as if he's without any feelings. So Mahatma KH is saying that the adept brothers are not altogether without feelings. They are not like a dried up flower which we press between the books of a page. Sorry, the pages of a book. But their feelings are very noble. So they are not devoid of feelings, but their feelings are most noble. They are virtuous and their desires are spiritual. They are for the good of all. Just like Master really wants Sinnett to succeed in his spiritual aspirations. So he has that liking for Sinnett. We also read in our own books, Guru Dronacharya, he had this special liking for his Shishya Arjun. Next, while the facilities of observation secured to some of us by our condition certainly give a greater breadth of view, a more pronounced and impartial, as a more widely spread humaneness. For answering Edison, we might justly maintain that it is continued. It is the business of magic to humanize our natures with compassion for the whole mankind as all living beings. Instead of concentrating and limiting our affections to one predilected race, yet few of us, except such as have attained the final negation of moksha, can so far enfranchise ourselves from the influence of our earthly connection as to be insusceptible in various degrees to the higher pleasures, emotions, and interests of the common run of humanity. Mahatmaji has mentioned here to Edison. He is Thomas Alva Edison, who was the famous American inventor and businessman. He lived around 1847 to 1931. So Edison, he had joined the Theosophical Society in New Jersey in 1878. He did not doubt that there is a supreme intelligence, but he did not believe in an extra cosmic God. So Edison, Thomas Edison, he was actually a member of the Theosophical Society. And he must have mentioned something to which Mahatmaji mentioned that it is the business of magic to humanize our natures with compassion. Let us try to understand what is the meaning of this. So the faculties of observation, this was there on the previous slide, last point, while the faculties of observation secured to some of us. So the faculties of observation, they are basically the faculties of the Mahatmas because they have attained to very high levels on the hierarchy of compassion. And how they have achieved these high levels, they have perfected their physical, psychical, mental, and spiritual natures to the utmost degree possible. And this they have done through lifetimes of rigorous training and discipline. Now they are at a level where they have a higher and a broader perspective of the progression of the entire mankind. And the powers they wield, they seem magical to ordinary man. But these magical powers, they unfold only when the adept has risen in that hierarchy of compassion, so that these powers can never be misused. And that is the meaning of business of magic, to humanize our nature with compassion. Only when they have risen in that hierarchy of compassion, so the powers which are like almost magical to us, they will wield those powers for the good of mankind. And it is very important, because otherwise, if a person who is not pure, who has not perfected himself and doesn't have compassion, then powers in the hand of such a person can be disastrous. And also, their consciousness has unfolded in such a way that they have compassion for the whole mankind rather than favoring any particular set of people. This is very evident. The Mahatmas are trying to give this knowledge to Senate and Hume and to the Western countries. And although at that time India was under the rule of the British, and still, so they don't favor any particular set of people. They want to share this knowledge for the betterment of the entire mankind. And although their interests lie in the welfare of the whole humanity, still they are influenced by their earthly connections until the time they reach moksha. It is only when a person, when the adept has reached. So, see what happens is the evolution of the adept will continue even after he has gained adeptship, that is the fifth initiation. His evolution and unfoldment will continue on the higher spiritual planes until he reaches moksha or nirvana. And these adept brothers, they will renounce moksha. So they have attained the final negation of moksha, meaning they have reached the stage of moksha, but they forego it and they stay back so that they can continue their work with humanity. So till that time, they will continue to have these earthly influence. So they will have this attraction towards some person, like in this case, Mahatmaji was interested in Senate. But this is again pure and noble. It is for his spiritual progress. Next point, until final emancipation reabsorbs the ego, it must be conscious of the purest sympathies called out by the aesthetics effects of high art, its tenderest chords to respond to the call of the holier and nobler human attachments. Until here, what is it is meant that this ego, which is the individuality of the adept, until it becomes one with the absolute, he will continue to be attracted by the purest souls. This is the law of attraction. This is what we just explained in the previous point, that until he reaches the stage of moksha, he will continue to be attracted by the purest souls. Of course, the greater the progress towards deliverance, the less will be the case, until, to crown all, human and purely individual personal feelings, blood ties and friendship, patriotism and race predilection, all will give way to become blended into one universal feeling, the only true and holy, the only unselfish and eternal one, love, an immense love for humanity as a whole. So as the adepts, as I mentioned, that their spiritual evolution continues on the higher plane, bringing them closer to deliverance, that is nirvana or moksha. At the stage of nirvana or moksha, all individual attractions of the adept will turn into only one altruistic eternal feeling, which is universal love. But until then, till the time he reaches that stage, he will continue to be attracted by all that is pure, noble, and aesthetic in the souls of men. This is his compelling attraction towards Senate. Mahatma KH is attracted towards Senate for this reason. Deliverance means to attain the state of Buddhahood. And when a person attains Buddhahood, like we know Gautam Buddha, he is always showering his blessings and spiritual force on all humanity equally. We know of his appearance on those special full moon days in the month of Vaishakha and Ashad. So till the adepts reach those stages, they will have their predilections to the pure souls. For it is humanity which is the great orphan. This is a very important statement which we must understand. For it is humanity which is the great orphan, the only disinherited one upon this earth, my friend, and it is the duty of every man who is capable of an unselfish impulse to do something, however little, for its welfare. Now, if we look at it, that on the earth there are many kingdoms, 10 kingdoms. All the kingdoms which are lower than the human kingdom, mineral, plant, animal, the elemental kingdoms, how do they evolve? They evolve by the natural impulse, which is inherent in nature and in the natural laws. So that is how their progression continues. And the kingdoms which are higher than the human kingdom, that is the kingdoms of the three grades of Dhyan Chauhans, they have already realized the greater truths of reality. They have reached the higher stages of Dhyanis. So it is upon this earth, it is only man who has been left to himself to realize these truths and end his own suffering. Now, when we say orphan, what does this word orphan mean? Just a minute. Yes. So when we speak of man as an orphan, orphan means one who has no parents. Now, we know that the real man is immortal because in his innermost essence, he is the spark of the divine, the Atma. So in that sense, if we take, man has no parents. He is an orphan. And further, by associating with his upadhis, he has fallen into this misery, which we call sansar. But in truth, there is no God apart from himself. There is no extra cosmic God who will hear his prayers or the cries for his help and will come and rid him of his suffering. Since this immortal divine spark is already within man, so man alone can free himself from this misery by recognizing his real self and raising himself to his higher self. Therefore, collectively, humanity is called the great orphan. And every man who has recognized or experienced the higher self, he must unselfishly work for the welfare of humanity. Because ultimately, we are all one. We are the rays or the sparks of the same divine spirit. And nobody is going to come to help us to get us rid of this misery. So Mahatma Ji says, poor, poor humanity. It reminds me of the old fable of the war between the body and its members. Here too, each limb of this huge orphan, fatherless and motherless, selfishly cares but for itself. The body, uncared for, suffers internally. Whether the limbs are at war or at rest, its suffering and agony never ceases. So this is a very graphic simile which Mahatma Ji has mentioned, the body and its different organs. They are compared to the divine spirit and the rays or the sparks, which we are. So the entire humanity is just one body, and no external entity can relieve humanity of its misery. It can be done only by the individual persons. They must help each other and they must live in harmony to end the suffering of humanity. Further, he says, and who can blame it, as your materialistic philosophers do, if in this everlasting isolation and neglect it has evolved gods, unto whom it ever cries for help but is not heard. Thus, since there is hope for man only in man, I would not let one cry whom I could save. These last two lines, they are the quotes which are taken from the book The Light of Asia, written by Edwin Arnold. It was published in 1879. So because humanity is orphan and no external agency can bring about its spiritual evolution, and the people They did not help each other. They didn't realize this brotherhood. Therefore, the misery and suffering, it continues. We can see it is happening even now, the war which is raging in Ukraine. When people do not help themselves, they start looking for external help. They cry out to the external gods to come and rid them of their misery. Of course, there are no external God who will come and free humanity of its suffering. And therefore, his cries are not heard. Nobody comes to help him. In fact, man himself is the God. It is said we are gods in exile, that divine spark within us that is within exile. So only man can help man. Only man can be his own hope. And it is the duty of each one to remove the suffering for whomsoever you can, because they are not separate, they are not apart from you. Yet I confess that I individually am not yet exempt from some of the terrestrial attachments. I am still attached towards some men more than towards others, and philanthropy, as preached by our great patron, the savior of the world, the teacher of nirvana and the law, has never killed in me either individual preferences of friendship, love for my next of kin, or the ardent feeling of patriotism for the country in which I was last materially individualized. The great patron over here is being referred to Gautam Buddha, savior of the world. He is the first of our humanity of this cycle, who reached nirvana, but he renounced it so he may remain in touch with men, with physical men. Otherwise, they have to renounce their upadhi and they cannot keep in touch with the beings on the physical plane. So Buddha taught about the great law. He taught about nirvana. He preached altruism and philanthropy. And all the adepts and brothers of the hierarchy, they imbibe these teachings. They imbibe his teachings and the values of Gautam Buddha. But they, as well as Mahatma KH, they have not yet reached Buddhahood. So we saw that after the fifth initiation, the Arhat becomes an adept. And then his evolution continues on higher planes. He reaches Buddhahood at a very, very higher stage. Now, it is true that their work is altruistic and it is for the good of entire humanity. But they still have preferences for their friends, for the next of kin, and for the country. And Mahatma KH is drawn towards Sinet by not because of the noble attributes of his soul. Sinet is a deserving soul. That is the reason. And he also has feelings of patriotism towards his country in which he last incarnated, that is India. In one of the previous letters also, Mahatma KH has mentioned that he mentioned it to Hume, I think, that you may pride yourself on not being a patriot, but I do not. So he has that feeling of patriotism. The British president, Dr. Wilde, so he's talking the references to Dr. Wilde. He labors under the most original ideas about us, whom he persists in calling yogis, without allowing the slightest margin to the enormous difference which exists even between Hat and Raj Yoga. This mistake must be laid at the door of Mrs. B, that is Madame Blavatsky, the able editor of the Theosophist, who fills up her volumes with the practices of diverse sannyasis and other blessed ones from the plains, without ever troubling herself with a few additional lines of explanation. So Dr. Wilde, he was the founder member of the, and he was the president of the British Theosophical Society. And he had this idea. He thought that the Mahatmas and yogis, they were same. What he thought is that they were the Hat yogis. He and the members of London Lodge, they didn't realize that there exists a great difference between Hat Yoga and Raj Yoga. See, Hatha Yoga is the lower form of yoga practice. It uses physical or psychophysiological means, and the body is subjected to extremes. what is the main aim of Hatha Yoga? It is to awaken the Kundalini, and in that they control the pran or the vital airs. But all these things are not encouraged in Theosophical studies, because if we develop the Kundalini by force, it is very dangerous and it can cause serious adverse effects. So Theosophy follows Raj Yoga, and the goal of Raj Yoga is to achieve the highest state of consciousness by meditation through samadhi. That is the ultimate goal of human life. So meditation is the main practice to bring about spiritual growth. That is to go to reach samadhi and self-realization. And this is the true system of developing spiritual powers, and automatically the psychic powers will also come. So this is done by regulating our thought, by concentration, by controlling the mind and the mental force. So this will lead to union with our higher self or the supreme spirit. Now, this misconception in the minds of these members like Dr. Wild about the adepts being nothing more than Hatha yogis, this was due to, in some degree, it was due to HPB's writings in the Theosophist. Although she did not intend it, but in her eagerness to let people know that there is much more than their daily lives, their whatever they see, their science tells, there is much more than that. So she would write about these different sannyasis and their practices, and perhaps she did not clarify sufficiently about what is Hatha Yoga and Raj Yoga. So this is what Mahatma Ji is telling. I think we can stop here for today, and there are a few more slides which we will complete in our last session next time. So thank you very much. I will stop the slides, and I request Meenakshi ji to give us the translation in Hindi.
थैंक यू सिस्टर, सभी को नमस्ते। और आज आपने इतने गहन विषय को इतने विस्तार से समझाया, इसके लिए अनेक धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू।
आज हम लेटर नंबर 15 का अगला भाग लेते हैं। मास्टर कहते हैं, कुछ हद तक यूरोपीय लोग अध्ययन और ध्यान के माध्यम से ध्वनि की मशीनरी की क्षमता को प्राप्त कर सकते हैं, लेकिन बस इतना ही। थियोसॉफिकल सत्यों को पश्चिमी राष्ट्रों में व्यापकता से प्रसारित होने में यह एक अवरोध है, जिसने पश्चिमी दार्शनिकों द्वारा थियोसॉफिकल अध्ययन को बेकार और काल्पनिक मानकर खारिज कर दिया। मैं आपको ऐसी भाषा को पढ़ना और लिखना या यहाँ तक कि समझना कैसे सिखाऊं जिसकी कोई वर्णमाला नहीं है, या आपके लिए श्रव्य शब्दों का अभी तक आविष्कार नहीं हुआ है। क्या उनके लिए हमारे टेक्निकल टर्म्स यानी तकनीकी शब्द, एक अस्पष्ट शब्दजाल, अर्थहीन ध्वनियां, उपयोग में लाए जाने वाले यंत्र और उपकरण चमत्कारी दैत्य नहीं होंगे? और मान लीजिए एक पल के लिए मुझे आपको उन रंगीन किरणों के रंगों का वर्णन करना है जो तथाकथित दृश्यमान स्पेक्ट्रम किरणों से परे है, जो हम में से कुछ को छोड़कर सभी के लिए अदृश्य है, यह समझाने के लिए कि हम अंतरिक्ष में तथाकथित व्यक्तिगत या आकस्मिक रंगों में से किसी एक को कैसे ठीक कर सकते हैं, या एक डायक्रोमेटिक बॉडी के किसी अन्य रंग को क्या आप समझ सकते हैं? क्या आप विचार कर रहे हैं? उनका ऑप्टिकल प्रभाव या मेरा अर्थ भी आप समझ रहे हैं? ऐसा मास्टर प्रश्न करते हैं सीनेट से। आगे वे कहते हैं, और चूंकि आप ऐसी किरणें नहीं देख सकते, न उन्हें जान सकते हैं, और न ही अभी तक आपके विज्ञान के पास उसके लिए कोई नाम है, यदि मैं आपसे कहूँ, मेरे मित्र सीनेट, कृपया अपने राइटिंग डेस्क से हिले बगैर खोजने की कोशिश करें और अपनी आंखों के सामने पूरे सोलर स्पेक्ट्रम को 14 प्रिज्मेटिक रंगों में विघटित रूप में प्रस्तुत करें, जैसा है वैसे, लेकिन उस ऑकल्ट लाइट की मदद से जिससे कि आप मुझे दूर से देख सकते हैं, जैसे कि मैं आपको देखता हूँ। क्या आप अपने शांत विनम्र तरीके से करारा जवाब नहीं देंगे कि 7 प्राइमरी कलर्स के अलावा अभी तक और रंग नहीं थे। किसी भी ज्ञात प्रक्रिया द्वारा अभी तक 7 प्रिज्मेटिक रंगों के आगे विघटित नहीं देखा गया। क्या मेरा अनुरोध जितना अवैज्ञानिक था उतना ही बेतुका था? यह जोड़ते हुए कि मेरे काल्पनिक सौर के पूरक को खोजने का प्रस्ताव आपके भौतिक विज्ञान के ज्ञान में सराहनीय नहीं है। शायद मेरे लिए यह बेहतर होगा कि मैं अपने कल्पित डाइक्रोमेटिक और सोलर पेयर्स को तिब्बत में जाकर खोजूं, क्योंकि आधुनिक विज्ञान ने अभी तक अपने सिद्धांतों के तहत ऐसे सभी डाइक्रोमेटिक बॉडीज के रंग जैसी इतनी सरल घटना को भी लाने में असमर्थ रहा है। और फिर भी सच्चाई यह जानती है कि ये रंग वास्तविक है। तब आप देख सकते हैं आपकी स्थिति के व्यक्ति के लिए गूढ़ विद्या का न केवल संपूर्ण ज्ञान बल्कि प्राथमिक ज्ञान प्राप्त करने के रास्ते में कितनी अलंघ्य कठिनाइयां हैं। सेमी इंटेलिजेंट फोर्सेस यानी एलिमेंटल्स को आप स्वयं कैसे समझ पाएंगे? वास्तव में उन्हें आदेश कैसे दे पाएंगे जिनका हमारे साथ संवाद का माध्यम शब्दों से नहीं बल्कि ध्वनियों और रंगों के माध्यम से होता है, दोनों के बीच के कंपनों के सह संबंध से होता है। बुद्धिमत्ता की इस श्रेणी के जीवों के अस्तित्व के बारे में आपकी कोई संकल्पना नहीं, न ही आपको उन पर विश्वास करने की अनुमति है। ऐसे जीवों का निर्माण मुख्यतः ध्वनि, प्रकाश और रंगों से होता है। नास्तिक और ईसाई, भौतिकवादी और आध्यात्मवादी सभी इस तरह की धारणा के खिलाफ अपने अपने तर्कों को सामने लाते हैं। विज्ञान निंदात्मक अंधविश्वास मानकर इन सब से ज्यादा विरोध करता है। इस सब के कारण हमारे अस्तित्व को ही नकारा जाता है। इसी कारण हम पर विश्वास करने वालों को धोखेबाज और मूर्ख कहा जाता है। और वही ज्ञान जो उच्चतम ज्ञान के उच्चतम लक्ष्य की ओर ले जाता है, जीवन और प्रज्ञता के वृक्ष की वास्तविकता की ओर ले जाता है, उसे कल्पना की विक्षिप्त उड़ान के रूप में देखा जाता है। मैं आपको चेतावनी देता हूँ और सामान्य तौर से याद दिलाने के अलावा मैं उसे दोहराऊंगा नहीं कि जिस कार्य को आप इतनी बहादुरी से कर रहे हैं, वह मिशन जो संदेहवादियों की दुनिया में है, वह शायद सभी कार्यों में से सबसे अकृतज्ञता पूर्वक होगा। लेकिन यदि आप आपके लिए मेरी मित्रता में विश्वास करते हैं, यदि आप उस व्यक्ति के सम्मानित शब्द को महत्व देते हैं जिसने अपने संपूर्ण जीवन में कभी भी अपने होठों को असत्यता से मलिन नहीं किया है, तब उन शब्दों को मत भूलना जो मैंने एक बार आपको लिखे थे। जो भी गूढ़ विद्या से संलग्न होते हैं, वे या तो अपने लक्ष्य तक पहुंचे या मिट जाए। एक बार महान ज्ञान के मार्ग पर उचित रूप से शुरुआत करने के बाद संदेह करना विक्षिप्तता की जोखिम लेना है। अकस्मात रुकना यानी पतन होना है। पीछे हटना यानी पीछे की ओर लुढ़कना। सीधे रसातल में जाना है। यदि आप ईमानदार हो और तुम हो, तब डरो मत। जैसा कि आप अपने बारे में सुनिश्चित है, वैसे भविष्य के बारे में वैसे भविष्य के बारे में क्या आप है? ऐसा मास्टर प्रश्न करते हैं। आपका अनुभव, आपका प्रशिक्षण, आपकी बुद्धिमत्ता, आपका बाहरी दुनिया का ज्ञान, संक्षेप में सभी मिलकर आपके द्वारा आरंभित कार्य को पूर्ण करने में सहायता करेगा। सोसाइटी को अपने हृदय के करीब मानकर किताब लिखना, इस संबंध में वे आपको मुझसे भी एक असीम रूप से उच्चतर स्तर पर रखते हैं। मैं यह स्वीकार करता हूँ कि मुझे इस पुस्तक और इसकी सफलता में उतनी ही दिलचस्पी है जितनी कि इसके भावी लेखक के जीवन की सफलता में है। मुझे आशा है कि कम से कम आप यह समझेंगे कि हम हृदयहीन नैतिक रूप से सॉरी, मुझे आशा है कि हम कम से कम आप मुझे आशा है कि कम से कम आप यह समझेंगे कि हम में से हृदयहीन नैतिक रूप से सूखे मम्मी नहीं है, जैसा कि कुछ हमें ऐसा होने की कल्पना करते हैं। हमारी स्थिति से हम में से कुछ एक को अवलोकन की शक्ति मिली है, जो हमें व्यापक दृष्टि प्रदान करती है, एक अधिक स्पष्ट और निष्पक्ष दृष्टि, अधिक व्यापक रूप से फैली दयालुता के रूप में मिली है। थॉमस अल्वा एडिसन का जवाब देने के लिए हम यह कह सकते हैं, हमारा स्नेह सिर्फ एक पसंदीदा जाति पर केंद्रित और सीमित करने के बजाय हम अपने स्वभाव को सभी जीवित प्राणियों के रूप में मानव जाति के लिए करुणा से मानवकृत करते हैं। फिर भी हम में से कुछ, सिवाय जो मोक्ष को प्राप्त कर चुके हैं, हमारे सांसारिक संबंध के प्रभाव से अपने आप को मुक्त रख सकते हैं। अनेक तरह के ऐहिक सुखों, भावनाओं और मानव जाति के सामान्य रुझान से हम प्रभावित नहीं होते। जब तक अंतिम मोक्ष में जीवात्मा विलीन नहीं होता, उसे शुद्धतम सहसंवेदना के प्रति जागरूक होना चाहिए। उसके संवेदनशील स्वर पवित्र और महान मानवों की पुकार पर प्रतिसाद देना चाहिए। बेशक मोक्ष की दिशा में जितनी अधिक प्रगति होगी, यह स्थिति उतनी ही कम होगी, जब तक कि मानवीय और केवल व्यक्तिगत निजी भावनाओं पर और मित्रता, देशभक्ति और रेस के प्रति झुकाव, इन पर विजय प्राप्त करने से सभी एक ही सार्वभौमिक भावना में सम्मिश्रित हो जाएंगे। एकमात्र सच्चा और पवित्र, एकमात्र निस्वार्थ और चिरकालिक प्रेम संपूर्ण मानवता के लिए अपार प्रेम, क्योंकि यह मानवता है जो बहुत ही अनाथ है, इस धरती पर एकमात्र बेदखल किया हुआ है मेरे मित्र। और यह हर एक व्यक्ति का कर्तव्य है जो निस्वार्थ भाव से मानव जाति के कल्याण के लिए कुछ करने में सक्षम है, वह चाहे कितना ही कम क्यों न हो। गरीब बेचारी मानवता, यह मुझे शरीर और उसके अंगों के बीच लड़ाई की पुरानी दंत कथा की याद दिलाती है। यहाँ भी पितृहीन और मातृहीन विशाल अनाथ का प्रत्येक अंग स्वार्थीपन से सिर्फ अपनी ही परवाह करता है। उसके अंग चाहे युद्ध की स्थिति में हो या विश्राम की, बिना परवाह के शरीर सदा पीड़ित रहता है। इसकी पीड़ा और कष्ट क्लेश कभी समाप्त नहीं होते, और उसे दोष कौन देगा? जैसे कि आपके भौतिकवादी तत्वज्ञानी कहते हैं, इस सदा के अलगाव और उपेक्षा में इसने अपने मन की संकल्पना से देवताओं का निर्माण किया, जिनके सामने यह हमेशा मदद के लिए रोता है, लेकिन सुना नहीं जाता है। इस प्रकार चूंकि मनुष्य के लिए केवल मनुष्य में ही आशा है जिसे मैं बचा सकता हूँ, ऐसे किसी को भी मैं रोने नहीं दूंगा। फिर भी मैं यह स्वीकार करता हूँ कि मैं व्यक्तिगत रूप से अभी तक कुछ भौतिक आसक्तियों से मुक्त नहीं हुआ हूँ। मेरा अभी भी दूसरों की तुलना में कुछ व्यक्तियों की ओर लगाव है, और महाकृपालु, जगत उद्धारक, निर्वाण और सिद्धांत के प्रवर्तक भगवान बुद्ध द्वारा उपदेशित परोपकारिता ने मुझमें कभी मेरे स्वजनों के लिए प्रेम, मित्रता के लिए व्यक्तिगत लगाव को खत्म नहीं किया, और न ही उस देश के लिए देशभक्ति की उत्कट भावना को खत्म किया जिसमें मेरा गत जन्म हुआ था। ब्रिटिश प्रेसिडेंट डॉक्टर वाइल्ड हठयोग और राजयोग के बीच भारी अंतर को थोड़ा भी न जानकर वे हमें योगी कहने की चेष्टा करते हैं। यह गलती द थियोसॉफिस्ट की सक्षम संपादक HPB के समक्ष रखी जानी चाहिए, जो अपने लेखों में विविध प्रकार के सन्यासियों की और मैदानी प्रदेशों के सत्पुरुषों की साधना के बारे में विस्तार पूर्वक के साथ लिखने का कष्ट करती है। थैंक यू। नमस्ते।
Thank you, Meenakshi ji. So this letter has some very occult concepts and a very deep meaning letter. If anybody would like to discuss this or put their point of view, I welcome them. It is recommended that everybody should read the original letter because it is such a long letter. I have picked up only the important points. So there is much in between them. It will be good if you can read that letter. Pradeep ji, I think we can close.
Yes, before close, anyone like to ask any questions? Just nobody is asking, nobody is ready.
What amazes me in his letters is that Mahatma ji knows about everything. He is even talking about that novel. So he knows fiction, he knows facts. In fact, he knows everything.
Yes, because it is all recorded in Akashic records, so that is the reason he can quote anything and everything from everywhere.
Yes.
Can you throw some light on this color? Why specifically Mahatma given some idea like subjective color, objective colors?
So as we saw in this, that subjective color is nothing but it is the corresponding elemental on the astral plane. And actually there are two aspects of knowledge. This is my personal understanding. One is to know your own self, that is Atma Vidya, self-realization. One is that knowledge. But simultaneously, we also have to know about the universe and its laws. So when we speak about these different planes, how those planes are working, because man does not exist on the physical plane alone. His constitution is there on the subtler planes also. The astral body is there, mental body is there, and we have our principles on that. So unless we know about how things manifest on that plane and what are the laws on that plane, then we cannot move to the higher knowledge, to the spiritual knowledge. So that is the reason I think he has mentioned to Senate. See, they were not able to come together physically and communicate with each other, but they could communicate even if they were far, had Senate known the occult properties of sound or these subjective colors. So if he would have known about it, then they could communicate even though they were far away from each other. So that is the reason we should know about it.
Okay.
Does it answer your question or I went off the point?
No. I just inquire about this color.
And sir, we can also understand the correlation between sound and light. See, for sound also, it will start, the source will be somewhere on a very high. And then what are the different forms of sound? It is said the para sound is there, paravak, and then pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikhari. Vaikhari is what manifests on the physical plane. The same thing, same parallel is there for light. It begins at some very high spiritual plane, but it is manifesting in all the intermediate subtle planes and then on the physical plane. And he, in the letter also it is mentioned there is a correspondence between frequency of the sound and frequency of the light on every plane.
Okay.
In fact, light and sound are the main factors in manifestation of the universe. I think it can be a whole another session of study, light and sound.
Okay, then.
We'll close the session today.
Yes.
So thank you all for joining. And now we'll end the session with a closing prayer. Om Asato ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Sarvesham Swastirabhavatu Sarvesham Shantirabhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Lokaha Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Here is an announcement that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, there shall be no program in this platform, in this online platform, because this platform is permitted by President of Indian section to be used for national conference, and it starts from 10:30 tomorrow till in the afternoon. Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So I will send all the details in a WhatsApp group as well as in email after a few minutes. With this announcement, we can close it now. Thank you for attending this program. Thank you, Bhagavanji. I will send you the program.
Thank you.
Shivaji, thank you.
Thank you.
Mahapatraji, thank you.
Namaste.
Okay.
Thank you, Mahapatra sir.
Thank